"Don't touch me, I'm ruined," she begged, and the mountain man said, "You're perfect to me." The snow is falling hard. A broken young woman stumbles into a lonely cabin, ashamed, bruised, and carrying a secret that could destroy her life. The man who shelters her isn't a hero by anyone's telling. He's a disgraced soldier, shunned by the town and living alone in the high country. But when whispers spread, the law knocks, and outlaws circle like wolves. The truth comes out. She might be carrying a child, and the valley they've claimed together sits on land the railroad wants. Gossip, greed, and gun barrels close in on them both. One woman's shame has become the battleground for justice, faith, and survival. Will the mountain man's vow be enough to protect her when the whole frontier is against them? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The gray-blue dawn painted shadows across fresh snow as Catherine stumbled through the drifts toward Sam Braddock's mountain cabin. Her dress hung in tatters and dried blood crusted at the corner of her split lip. Every step seemed to cost her more strength than she had left to give. Sam heard the weak knock and opened his door to find her swaying on his threshold, her face pale as the snow behind her. When he reached out instinctively to steady her, she flinched away. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm ruined." Sam dropped his hands to his sides immediately, keeping them open and visible. Without a word, he stepped back, giving her space to enter on her own terms. The cabin's warmth reached out to embrace her as she crossed the threshold. "Let me get you something warm," he said softly, moving to the iron stove where he kept his kettle. His movements were slow and deliberate, nothing sudden that might startle her. From the corner of his eye, he watched her stand frozen near the door, trembling like an aspen leaf in winter wind. He reached for his prized buffalo robe, rolled neat, beside his bunk, and held it out at arm's length. "Here," he offered, not moving closer. "It's clean and warm." Catherine took the robe with shaking hands, wrapping it around herself like armor. Sam busied himself with the kettle, letting her find her own way to the hearth. The familiar tasks of building up the fire and setting water to boil gave her time to settle Dot when steam rose from the kettle. He poured hot water into a basin and gathered clean cloths from his supplies, setting them near her, but not too near. He spoke in the same steady voice he used to gentle, frightened horses. "You're safe," he said simply. She lifted her eyes to his face for just a moment before looking away, a fresh tremor running through her. A tear traced down her cheek. Sam, not where she could see him clearly, keeping his distance. "You're perfect to me," he said, his voice as firm and reliable as a church bell calling faithful to worship. The words broke something inside her. Tears flowed freely now as she hugged the buffalo robe tighter. Sam moved carefully to prepare a pot of broth, giving her privacy in her grief while ensuring she remained in his peripheral vision. When he offered the cup of warm broth, she took it with still trembling hands. Between sips and shivers, her story emerged in fragments. "Riders," she managed, "on the North Fork Trail." Her voice faded to nothing, but Sam understood enough. Without comment, he rose and walked to the cabin's heavy door. The bar fell into place with a solid thunk that seemed to ease some of the tension from Catherine's shoulders. Sam stepped into the lean-to where he kept his traps and supplies, returning with a small jar of healing salve. "Goats are restless tonight," he commented, setting the jar within her reach. "Reckon that storm front's moving in faster than expected. Good thing you made it here before it hit." His matter-of-fact tone and simple words about everyday things seemed to help. The worst of her trembling eased as he continued talking about the weather, his goats, the way the clouds were building up over the mountain. As evening settled in, the wind began to rise, whistling through the cabin's sturdy logs. Catherine had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep on the pallet Sam had laid out near the fire. The buffalo robe rose and fell with her steady breathing, and the kettle ticked softly as it cooled on the stove. Sam knelt beside his bunk, his worn hat held respectfully in his calloused hands. His prayer was quiet but fierce in its conviction. "Lord," he whispered, "no harm will reach her here tonight. I swear it." His eyes moved to the window where snow was beginning to swirl. At first light, he would ride out. Flour they needed anyway. But more importantly, he'd fetch proper medicine from the physician in town. For now, though, his post was here, standing guard over the wounded dove that had sought shelter in his cabin. The wind moaned outside, but inside, the fire crackled steadily, casting its protective glow over both protector and protected as the long night settled in. The first pale light of dawn crept through the cabin's frosted windows. Sam Braddock moved quietly, not wanting to wake Catherine, who still slept deeply beneath the buffalo robe. He tore a clean page from his ledger book and wrote in careful letters, "Bat by noon, door barred, rifle loaded." He placed the note beside her empty cup near the hearth. Snowball, his reliable gray mare, stamped impatiently in the bitter morning air as Sam tightened the cinch on his saddle. The leather creaked in the cold, and his breath made clouds in the still air. The switchback trail down to town lay treacherous with ice, requiring all of Snowball's sure-footedness and Sam's careful guidance. The bell above Watkins Mercantile jingled as Sam pushed through the door. Morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, catching motes that danced above the wooden counter. Sam gathered his supplies methodically. Flour, a bottle of laudanum from behind the counter, and several yards of soft muslin. The clerk, Tommy Watkins, rang up the purchases with pointed slowness, his sideways glance speaking volumes. Sam kept his face neutral, knowing the speed of frontier gossip. He paid in silver coins, each one hitting the counter with a decisive ping. Outside the Mercantile, Sheriff Alders stood waiting, his badge catching the morning light. The lawman's face was grave as he stepped closer to Sam's horse. "Braddock," he said quietly. "Might want to know. Couple riders been asking questions." Wade Corman and his shadow Sloat. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. They're mighty interested in finding what they called a fallen girl. Sam's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Much obliged, Sheriff." The sun stood directly overhead when Sam guided Snowball back up the mountain trail. He announced his return before entering the cabin, not wanting to startle Catherine. Inside, she had already stoked the fire and set water to boil. Corman and Sloat were in town, he said without preamble, setting down his purchases, asking questions. Catherine's hands trembled as she took the muslin, but her voice remained level. "I should tell you the truth of it." Sam added wood to the fire and set about making a hearty stew, giving her space to find her words. The familiar tasks of cutting vegetables and preparing meat filled the silence until she was ready to speak. "There was a barn dance," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The wooden spoon in her hands turned over and over as she spoke. "They kept bringing me hard cider. I didn't want it, but they wouldn't stop." Her knuckles went white around. The spoon. There was a scuffle in the dark. I couldn't see properly. Then hoofbeats and them laughing as they rode away. Sam stirred the stew, his movements deliberate and calm despite the anger burning in his chest. Steam rose from the pot, carrying the rich scent of cooking meat and vegetables through the cabin. Catherine's next words came out in a rush. I fear I'm with child." Her hands pressed against her stomach. "The timing, it doesn't match up right. My Thomas, he died of fever 3 months past." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We were to be married in the spring." Sam ladled stew into 2 bowls, setting one before her with gentle hands. "A child is innocent," he said firmly. "In this house, no blame will ever touch them. Fresh tears fell, but something in Catherine's shoulders eased at his words. They ate in companionable silence as afternoon light slanted through the windows. After the meal, Sam moved purposefully around the cabin. He fixed a second latch to the inside of the door, testing its strength with a firm pull. His Winchester rifle found a new home on the window stool, within easy reach but out of direct sight from outside. "If you wake scared," he said, demonstrating. "With 2 sharp whistles, signal like so. I'll hear it." He checked the rifle's action, the metal clicking smoothly. "Come morning, I'll teach you to shoot." No one should feel helpless in their own home. Catherine touched the rifle's stock tentatively. "I've never fired one before. You'll learn," Sam assured her. "We'll start at sunup." The stew pot bubbled softly on the stove, filling the cabin with warmth and the promise of security, while outside, the winter sun began its slow descent behind the mountains. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard as Sam led Catherine to a weathered stump near the cabin. Frost still crunched beneath their boots, and their breath made clouds in the crisp air. Sam held his Winchester with practiced ease, demonstrating each movement with careful precision. "First rule," he said, opening the action smoothly. "Always check if it's loaded." His fingers moved deliberately, showing her how to verify an empty chamber. Better to look twice than make one mistake. Catherine watched intently, her hands clasped tight against her shawl. When Sam offered her the rifle, she took it gingerly, as if it might bite. "It won't break," he assured her with a gentle smile. "And right now, it can't hurt anyone." "Empty chamber, see?" She nodded, adjusting her grip as he showed her. The metal felt cold and heavy in her hands, but somehow reassuring too. "Now, the trigger needs a steady squeeze," Sam continued. "And this here's a single action. Means you gotta cock it first, nice and slow." He guided her thumb to the hammer. "Patience. Beats panic every time with these." They practiced with the empty rifle, Catherine growing more confident with each cycle of the action. The familiar movements seemed to settle her nerves, and a hint of color returned to her cheeks. A movement caught Sam's eye. Up on the ridge, a lone rider stood silhouetted against the morning sky. The figure sat motionless for a long moment, then turned and disappeared over the crest. Sam's jaw tightened. "Reckon it's time we showed ourselves in town," he said carefully. "Better to face rumors head-on than let them fester." Catherine's fingers whitened on the rifle stock, but she nodded. "You're right." They waited until after midday before setting out, taking the wider wagon road down the mountain. Catherine rode Sam's spare mare, her back straight despite her obvious tension. The winter sun offered little warmth as they made their way into town. The main street was busy with afternoon traffic, but conversations died as they passed. Shopkeepers paused in their doorways, and women on the boardwalk turned to whisper behind raised hands. Catherine kept her eyes forward, though her knuckles were white on the reins. Sheriff Alder met them outside his office, his weathered face showing concern rather than judgment. "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Might be best if you could come by tomorrow when there's proper daylight. Need to get your statement in the record." "I'll come," Catherine said softly but firmly. The sheriff nodded and pulled a card from his vest pocket, writing out the time with his pencil stub. Sam took it with a grateful nod. As they tied their horses at the general store, a well-dressed man approached. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, incongruous with the dusty street. "Mr. Braddock," he said smoothly. "Mr. Pike, representing the railroad's land office." His smile didn't reach his eyes as they flicked between Sam and Catherine. "Couldn't help but notice your valley sits right in the way of progress." Sam's expression remained neutral. "That valley's been my home 15 years. Indeed." Pike brushed invisible dust from his sleeve. "Though one never knows when prior claims might surface. Paperwork can be so complicated." The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. Catherine stepped forward, her spine stiffening. "Mr. Braddock's claim is honest and true," she said, her voice steady despite her pale face. Pike's smile widened fraction. "We shall see, won't we?" He touched his hat and moved away. Boots clicking on the boardwalk dot, they bought their lamp oil. Quickly and mounted up, eager to be away from the town's heavy stairs. The ride home was silent, both lost in thought as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. Back in the cabin's familiar warmth, Sam pulled his worn leather tack box from beneath his bunk. Inside, a journal recorded years of weather, contracts, and events in his careful hand. He added the day's encounters in detail, including Pike's veiled threat. Catherine sat by the lamp, slowly braiding her long hair. Her fingers worked steadily at the task, as if the familiar motion could ward off fear. Sheriff Alder's appointment card hung by the door, its penciled numbers stark against the white paper. The weight of their situation settled around them like an approaching storm. The town's harsh judgment, unknown riders watching the trails, and now Pike's threats against Sam's land. Their mountain refuge suddenly felt more precarious than the icy trails that led to it. "We'll ride to the sheriff together at sunup," Sam said, closing his journal. "Truth the best shield we've got." Catherine tied off her braid and nodded. "Together," she agreed softly. The pale dawn light was just breaking over the mountains as Sam and Catherine mounted their horses for the ride to town. Frost glittered on the trail ahead, and their breath made clouds in the cold morning air. Sam kept his horse close to Catherine's mar, watching for ice on the switchbacks. The sheriff's office was already warm when they arrived, a pot of coffee steaming on the iron stove. Sheriff Alder sat behind his desk, papers laid out neat and orderly, his pencil freshly sharpened. He gestured for Catherine to take the wooden chair across from him. "Take your time, miss," he said, voice steady and professional. "Just tell it. Plain as you remember." Catherine's hands were folded tight in her lap, but her voice stayed clear as she recounted that night. The barn dance, the forced cider, the struggle in the darkness, the sound of hooves and cruel laughter. Sheriff Alder wrote every detail without comment, neither offering judgment nor false comfort. His pencil scratched steadily across the paper, recording her words exactly as she spoke them. When she finished, Alder set down his pencil and straightened the pages. "I'll wire Fort Garland today," he said. "Corman and Sloat have a reputation there. Might be they're wanted for other business, too." Outside the office, they nearly bumped into a tall man in a preacher's collar, his black coat dusty from the trail. He tipped his hat politely. "Reverend Elias Boone," he introduced himself. "Circuit preacher for these parts." His eyes were kind, but keen as he looked between them. Instead of launching into a sermon, he simply quoted, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." The words settled gentle as snow. Catherine ducked her head, but some of the tension eased from her shoulders. Boone's gaze lingered on Sam's faded cavalry coat. After Catherine stepped away to retie her horse's reins, the preacher spoke low. "In my surveying days, I saw army stamps on forged papers now and then." He shrugged slightly. "Old life. But the eye remembers." He left the observation hanging. Making no demands for explanation, Sam nodded once, understanding the offered alliance. Before he could respond, Catherine swayed slightly where she stood, one hand going to a temple. Sheriff Alder frowned in concern. "Maybe best if you rest at the boarding house today, miss. Mrs. Peterson keeps clean rooms." But Sam shook his head, watching how Catherine's breathing had gone shallow. "Think she does better in the mountain air," he said quietly. "We'll take it. Slow going back." "I could call Sunday," Reverend Boone offered, "if you'd welcome a visit." "Much obliged," Sam replied, already moving to steady Catherine's elbow. The ride home was careful and unhurried. When they reached the creek crossing, Sam dismounted to lead Catherine's horse through the ford, testing each step on the ice-slick rocks. The Mari picked her way delicately across, Catherine holding the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands. Evening settled soft around the cabin as Sam worked by lantern light, hammering a snow-bent roof batten back into place. The steady rhythm of his work mixed with homely sounds from inside the clink of Catherine's spoon against the harsh stones as she warmed yesterday's bread, the comfortable pop of the fire. "Nanny goat's looking heavy," Sam called down from the roof. "Reckon she kid come spring." "The brown one too," Catherine replied. Her voice was steady now, focused on ordinary things. "I noticed her favoring her left side this morning. Could use the extra milk," Sam said. He gave the batten one final tap, testing its strength. Might even have enough to try cheese-making. Their simple exchange floated on the evening air, building tomorrow like a bridge they could walk across together. When Sam climbed down, Catherine had set out 2 tin cups of tea, steam rising in the gathering dark dot inside. Sam took out his leather tack box and carefully placed Alder's receipt, proof of Catherine's testimony, alongside his water-right notice for the cabin spring. The official paper was worn at the corners now, but the filing date from 2 summers past was still clear. He closed his journal over both documents, preserving truth and claim together. The Sunday dawn painted the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. Reverend Boone's Mari climbed the last switchback to Sam's cabin, her sides heaving from the steep ascent. Steam rose from her flanks in the crisp morning air as the preacher dismounted, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. Sam met him at the door, while Catherine hung back near the hearth, her fingers twisting in her apron. The cabin had been swept clean, with 2 wooden crates set as makeshift pews before a rough-hewn table serving as altar. "The Lord brings us together in all places," Boone said warmly, setting his Bible on the table. He removed his hat and coat, revealing a simple black vest beneath. No fancy stole or collar marked him as different from any other frontier man, save the gentle wisdom in his eyes. The service was brief but heartfelt. Boone's voice filled the small cabin as he read from him. "John, speaking of the Good Shepherd, who knows his sheep by name and lays down his life for them." His weathered hands turned the pages with care as he chose passages of mercy, not judgment. "The Lord seeks the lost," he said, meeting Catherine's eyes directly, "and rejoices in their finding." The words held no condemnation, only welcome. After the final prayer, Catherine poured coffee into tin cups. The rich aroma mixed with wood smoke as they sat together, speaking of practical matters. Boone's sharp eyes caught sight of Sam's water-right notice pinned by the door, its corners worn and yellowing. "Might want to get a fresh certified copy of that," he advised, warming his hands around his cup. "I've seen too many records take walks when railroad money starts flowing. Best to have backups stored safe." Sam nodded, understanding the warning beneath the casual tone. "Reckon we'll ride down tomorrow if the weather holds." "I'll be through again in a fortnight," Boone said, as he prepared to leave. "Godspeed to you both." He mounted his Mar, now rested, and turned down the trail with a final tip of his hat. The afternoon sun found a pocket between the clouds, warming a sheltered clearing where Sam had set up targets. Catherine stood steady, the rifle comfortable in her hands now as she sighted down the barrel. "Read." Her shots rang out in measured rhythm, 1, 2, 3. When they checked the target, her grouping had tightened considerably. "You're getting the feel of it," Sam said with quiet approval. They were gathering the spent shells when movement caught their eye. A woman emerged from the aspen grove, her dark wool skirt brushing the snow. Sam straightened, recognition in his stance. "Lena Nez," he said respectfully. "Didn't expect to see you this high up." The Navajo midwife inclined her head slightly. The preacher spoke of a woman who might need checking. Her eyes, wise and kind, settled on Catherine. if you wish it. Catherine hesitated, then gave a small nod. Inside the cabin, Lena's experienced hands moved with gentle efficiency as she examined Catherine. She spoke softly of what to watch for: swelling in the hands and feet, fever that wouldn't break, pains that came too early. "The child grows well," she assured them both. Then she turned to Sam, teaching him how to brew willow bark tea for the morning sickness. Her fingers crushed the pale bark, releasing its sharp scent as she demonstrated the proper strength. "Too weak does nothing," she explained. "Too strong brings its own troubles. Like all medicine, it needs balance." The lesson complete, Lena gathered her shawl. "I stay with my sister's family near the agency," she said. "Send word if you need me." She mounted her pony with fluid grace, the leather of her saddle creaking as she turned downstream. Sam watched until she disappeared among the trees, then opened his journal to the page headed "People I Trust." Below Reverend Boone's name, written in his careful hand, he added, "Lena Nez, midwife." Snow began to fall as evening approached, steady and soft. The flakes drifted past the window like feathers, adding fresh white to the old. Inside, they banked the fire for the night, planning tomorrow's ride to town for those vital copies, if the road stayed clear enough for travel. "Lena knows her craft," Sam said quietly as they worked. "And Reverend Boone's a good man. We're not alone in this." Catherine nodded, watching the snowfall. The cabin felt warmer somehow, as if the simple act of writing trusted names in a book had drawn a circle of protection around their mountain home. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Sam studied the road down to town. The storm had left nearly a foot of white powder, but the warming rays promised better conditions by midday. He and Catherine kept busy inside until the sun stood high, then prepared for the journey. "We'll take the sled down," Sam decided, eyeing the slick trail. Safer than riding double in these conditions. He hitched Snowball to the rough-hewn timber sled, checking the traces twice before helping Catherine settle on the wooden seat. They descended slowly, Sam leading Snowball, while the runners cut clean tracks through unmarked snow. The horse picked her way carefully, steam rising from her flanks in the cold air. Catherine held tight to the seat rails, her breath making small clouds as they worked their way down the switchbacks. The county clerk's office stood quiet when they arrived, sunlight streaming through its dusty windows. Mr. Harrow looked up from his desk, his round spectacles catching the light. Behind him, Pike's shadow darkened the doorway, making the clerk's frown deepen. "Need certified copies of my water, right?" Sam said evenly, keeping his voice calm and businesslike. "The one filed 2 summers past for the cabin spring." Harrow nodded, though his movements seemed hesitant under Pike's watchful eye. He pulled out the thick leather ledger, turning pages with damp fingers until he found the entry. The clerk's stamp made a dull thud as he pressed it against fresh paper, marking each copy as official. $3 for the copies, Harrow mumbled. Sliding the documents across his desk, Sam counted out the coins, tucking the precious papers inside his coat. As they stepped out into the sharp afternoon light, the sight of Corman and Sloat lounging against the hitching rail made his spine stiffen. Their smiles held nothing friendly, just cold calculation and threat. Sam kept his hands deliberately loose at his sides, no sudden moves toward his gun. He guided Catherine past with a gentle touch at her elbow, his boots crunching in the packed snow. The outlaw's eyes followed their every step, but no one reached for steel. The mercantile's bell chimed as they entered, bringing welcome warmth and the smell of coffee. Martha Valdez stood behind the counter, her dark eyes kind as she took in Catherine's pale face. Without a word, she disappeared into the back room and returned with a cloth sack. "Dried peaches," Martha said softly, pressing the bag into Catherine's hands. "For the baby." Her smile held no judgment, only understanding. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the gift close. Through the window, they watched Sheriff Alder confronting Pike outside his office. "Stop hanging around my door," Alder's stern voice carried through the glass. "You've got no business here." Pike's smile never wavered as he tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. He strolled toward the telegraph office, a folded map protruding from his coat pocket. His boots left sharp prints in the snow, straight and purposeful as railroad ties. The journey home took longer, the sled running heavy in the afternoon slush. Shadows stretched long across the snow by the time they reached the cabin. Inside, Sam hung the tin box above the mantel with careful reverence, placing 2 of the certified copies inside. The third went into his journal, tucked between pages recording water levels and weather. Night settled over the mountain, bringing with it a lone coyote's call that echoed off the ridges. Sam's lips pursed in an answering whistle, low and natural. As breathing, at Catherine's questioning look, he shrugged. "Old habit," he explained. "Gets lonely up here sometimes. Used to answer them just to hear something besides my own voice." Catherine moved about the cabin with growing confidence, setting out 2 bowls for their evening meal. Her hands no longer shook as she spooned out the stew, and her voice was steady. As she suggested, we should stay close to home a few days. Let things settle in town. Sam nodded, settling into his chair. 3 days ought to do it. Give folks time to cool their tempers. He paused, then added quietly, "We could pray together each night, if you're willing." "I'd like that," Catherine said softly, and the simple words filled the cabin with peace, as deep as the snow outside. The next 3 days passed in quiet industry at the cabin. Sam bent over his worn journal each evening, tongue between his teeth as Catherine guided his hand through letters and numbers. His usually steady fingers, so sure with trapped wire and leather, moved carefully across the paper as he practiced his. "Writing, that's much better," Catherine said, watching him copy out the day's events. His letters stood straighter now, more confident on the page. During daylight, they fell into an easy rhythm. Sam checked and mended his trap lines, working broken metal links back into shape with practiced twists. Catherine took up the wool cards, drawing the fibers into even rows while snow drifted past. The windows. The soft swish-swish of the cards filled the cabin with peaceful purpose. On the 4th morning, hoofbeats crunched through the crusted snow outside. Sam recognized Reverend Boone's dappled moire before the knock came. The preacher's coat sparkled with frost as he stepped inside, removing his hat to warm his hands by the fire. "Might I speak with you both?" he asked, once they'd settled with coffee cups. "Not just as your pastor, but as a man who's seen a long road." His weathered face held both kindness and concern. Sam nodded, setting his cup aside. "Speak your mind, Reverend." "I've been thinking on your situation," Boone said carefully. "The spring circuit judge won't pass through for months yet. But there's an older way, a covenant marriage before God and witnesses. Simple, legal, and right in his eyes." Catherine's hands tightened around her cup. "You'd do that for us?" "With joy," Boone smiled. "We'd need one more witness." A knock at the door interrupted him. Martha Valdez stood on the threshold, a fresh loaf, wrapped in cloth, in her hands. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, "but something told me to ride up today." "You're right on time," Boone said, eyes twinkling. "We need a second witness." Sam moved to his workbench and returned with 2 rings he'd crafted in quiet moments, strips of rawhide and polished brass braided together in endless circles. Catherine touched them wonderingly. "They're beautiful," she whispered. They gathered before the hearth, where the morning light streamed through frost-edged windows. Reverend Boone opened his Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of use. Martha stood beside Catherine, her dark eyes warm with approval. Sam took Catherine's hands in his, steady and gentle. The words came from his heart, simple and true. I take you as my wife, before God and these witnesses. I promise to protect and provide, to be faithful and kind, till death parts us. Catherine's voice trembled, but grew stronger with each word. I take you as my husband, before God and these witnesses. I promise to be true and loving, to stand beside you in all seasons till death parts us. They exchanged the braided rings, which fit as if they'd been made by Providence itself. Boone's Amen resonated in the quiet cabin, and Martha wiped happy tears from her cheeks. Martha's bread and some venison stew made a proper wedding feast. While they ate, Boone carefully recorded the covenant in his notebook, his pen scratching across the paper. I'll have this notarized at the county clerk's office tomorrow, he promised. It'll stand as legal and binding as any judge's paper. The afternoon passed in quiet celebration until their guest departed, Martha hugging Catherine tight before mounting up. God bless this union, she said softly. When evening settled over the mountain, Sam and Catherine sat close by the fire, now husband and wife. Their prayer was simple, for peace, for protection, for the life growing beneath Catherine's heart. As they banked the coals for the night, Catherine asked softly, "What shall we name the baby?" Sam smiled, touching the ring on his finger. "If it's a girl, maybe Grace?" "Grace." Catherine tested the word. "It's lovely. And for a boy?" "Matthew," Sam suggested. "After my father." Catherine nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "Both good names. Strong names." Through the window, stars wheeled across the dark sky. Tomorrow, their covenant would be recorded alongside Sam's water, right? Another piece of paper marking their claim to this mountain home. But the truest record was written in their hearts, in the quiet joy of two souls bound together before God. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow as Sam's axe rose and fell, splitting logs for the evening fire. The steady rhythm of his work filled the crisp mountain air, each chunk of wood falling cleanly to either side. Catherine watched from the doorway, one hand resting unconsciously on her belly, as three riders appeared on the trail below. Her heart skipped when she recognized them, Pike astride his glossy bay, flanked by Corman and Sloat. Sam set his axe aside deliberately, keeping it within reach as the men dismounted. "Mr. Braddock," Pike called out, his polished boots crunching through the snow. He pulled a rolled document from his coat. "Railroad business today." Sam stood his ground, saying nothing as Pike unfurled a survey map marked with red lines. "This valley's been selected for a spur line. Essential development." Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll need your water right for the steam engines." "Not for sale," Sam said quietly. Pike produced another paper. "Actually, your appropriation's been marked abandoned. Non-beneficial use during winter months." He tapped figures that hadn't been. "They're on Sam's original filing. Flows too low to maintain a valid claim." "Those numbers are wrong," Sam said. "I've measured that spring every month for 2 years." Catherine remembered Reverend Boone's warning about documents that walked. She slipped inside to the tin box above the mantel while Pike droned on about progress and inevitability. "Just sign. This quit claim," Pike was saying when she returned. "Save yourself trouble." Catherine stepped forward, certified copies in hand. Her voice rang clear as she read aloud. "Spring appropriation granted to Samuel Braddock, 5 cubic feet per minute. Minimum flow witnessed and recorded." She met Pike's cold stare. "These copies were certified by Clerk Harrow 3 days ago." Pike's lip curled as he noticed her slightly thickened waist. "A judge will sort this out." He pulled a summons from his vest. "County court, 5 days hence." Though harboring an immoral woman might interest the magistrate sooner. Sam's jaw clenched at the insult, but he kept his hands loose at his sides. He took the summons without comment, though his eyes promised that Pike would answer for his words someday. "Think on it, Braddock," Pike called as they mounted up. "Railroad gets what railroad wants." Corman and Sloat exchanged ugly grins before, following Pike down the trail. Once they were gone, Sam studied the summons. "I should ride to Alder now," he said. "Better to face this straight than let Pike spring some surprise arrest." Catherine nodded, though fear knotted her stomach. They were heading to the barn to saddle the gray when hoofbeats approached again. This time, it was Sheriff Alder, his badge catching the late sun. His face was grave. "Sam," he said heavily, "I've got a writ here. Says you failed to appear for a prior summons." He held out the paper. Pike's lawyer filed it this morning. "There wasn't any prior summons," Sam said. "I know it," Alder sighed, "but the paper's proper on its face. I have to take you in until the magistrate reviews it tomorrow." He looked genuinely pained. "I gave my word no chains if you'll come peaceful." Sam squeezed Catherine's hand. "Bar the door tonight," he murmured. "I'll be home soon as this is straight." Catherine fought back tears as Sam climbed into Alder's wagon without protest. She watched until they disappeared around the bend, the setting sun painting the snow blood red. Only then did she allow herself to weep, one hand pressed to her belly where their child grew, the other clutching the certified water rights that suddenly seemed so fragile inside. She latched the door as Sam had asked, then loaded the rifle, just as he taught her. The cabin felt vast and empty without his steady presence. She added wood to the fire and settled in her chair to wait for morning, determined to be strong for both their sakes. Through the window, she watched darkness claim the mountain. Somewhere in town, Sam would be spending the night in a cell, trusting in Alder's fairness and God's justice. Catherine bowed her head and prayed for strength to face whatever morning might bring. The jail's back room was clean but spare, just a narrow cot and barred window facing the alley. Sam sat quietly, his hat on his knee, as Sheriff Alder's boots scraped across the wooden floor. "More coffee?" Alder offered, holding up the tin pot. Steam curled in the lamplight. "Much obliged," Sam replied, extending his cup through the bars. Alder poured, muttering under his breath, "Railroads stink all over this business." Pike's got half the county clerk's office jumping at his shadow. He set the pot down with a clank. "Paper says what it says, though. Gotta wait on the magistrate." "Reckon so." Sam sipped the bitter brew. "Could I send word to Catherine? Don't want her fretting all night." Alder considered this, then nodded. "Martha Valdez is still at her shop. I'll have her carry a note." He provided paper and pencil, watching as Sam carefully formed each letter, fruit of Catherine's patient teaching. Back at the mountain cabin, Catherine unfolded Sam's message by lamplight. His writing was deliberate and clear. "Don't worry. Magistrate coming at sundown. Sheriff fair. Stay safe." "Sam." She pressed one hand to her lower back as another tight ache bloomed there. The pains had started at sunset, coming and going like waves. Not sharp yet, but getting stronger. She moved to the hearth, where water already simmered, adding willow bark as Lena had shown them. While the tea steeped, Catherine laid out the soft muslin squares Lena had gifted her. "For when the time comes," she'd said with knowing eyes. Another cramping pain made her pause, breath catching. Too soon, she thought. The baby wasn't due for weeks yet. She sipped the bitter willow tea, watching the cabin shadows dance. The thought of riding through darkness, alone and in pain, made her shiver. No, better to wait for light. She kept time by the cooling embers, noting how the aches came closer. Together dawn brought gentle snow and decision. Catherine packed the muslin and remaining willow bark, then wrapped herself warmly. After securing the cabin, she took up a piece of chalk and marked the door with clear words. At Martha's, the ride. Down was slow. each step of her horse carefully placed on the snowy trail. The morning light was pearl gray through the clouds when she finally reached town. Martha opened her back door at the first knock. "Child, you're white as milk," Martha said, taking one look at Catherine's face. "Upstairs with you, now." The widow's spare room was small but warm, with a narrow bed and cotton print curtains. Catherine sank onto the quilts, grateful for Martha's firm kindness as another pain gripped her. "How long between?" Martha asked, helping her with her boots. "Getting closer," Catherine managed. "Started last night." They both looked up at a knock on the doorframe. Reverend Boone stood there, snow melting on his shoulders. Just back from the clerk's office," he said. "Saw you ride in." His eyes narrowed with concern as Catherine winced. "The baby?" Martha nodded. "Need to find Lena Nez." "I'll ride for her now," Boone said without hesitation. "She's likely at her sister's place near the agency." Catherine gripped the bedpost as the Reverend's boots thundered down the stairs. Through the window, she watched him mount and spur his horse toward the agency road. Heavy clouds were building in the north. Martha's kitchen clock ticked steadily below. Catherine counted between pains. 10 minutes now. She whispered prayers into the quiet room, thinking of Sam just streets away behind bars in the jail. Alder brought fresh coffee and news. "Magistrate's due at sundown," he told Sam. "If we can prove the first summons was forged, and I reckon we can, you'll be home by dark." Sam nodded, thinking of Catherine alone in their cabin. The snow was falling, harder now, thick flakes swirling past his window. He could just see the steeple of the church where Reverend Boone had married them days ago. Its cross a dark line against the pearled sky. The clock in the sheriff's office struck noon as clouds continued to stack against the mountains. In Martha's upstairs room, Catherine pressed both hands to her belly, breathing through another wave of pain. 10 minutes. Still 10 minutes. Martha sat nearby, her calloused hands steady as she folded clean linens and waited for Lena's arrival. Outside, Reverend Boone's horse kicked up snow as he raced toward the agency road, the clouds building darker behind him. The afternoon storm rolled in fast, turning the sky slate dark. Reverend Boone urged his horse along the agency trail, snow pelting his face. Through the swirling white, he spotted a rider approaching, Lena Nez, her dark shawl pulled tight against the wind. She must have heard the news from her sister. Without a word, Lena wheeled her pony around, her medicine satchel thumping against her side as she fell in beside Boone. They rode hard through the thickening storm, their horses' hooves throwing up clumps of wet snow in the jail's front office. Sheriff Alder spread the questionable summons across his desk. Reverend Boone, snow still melting from his coat, leaned in close to study the document. "Look here," Boone said, pointing to the county seal. "The impression's wrong for the date. And this typeface." He traced the letters with a weathered finger. "Wasn't used in territorial courts until last year. This summons claims to be from 18 months ago." Alder's eyebrows rose. "You seem mighty knowledgeable about such things, Reverend." Boone smiled faintly. "Before I took the cloth, I surveyed rail lines out of St. Louis. Learned to spot forged permits and claims. The companies were always trying to backdate papers." They straightened up. "You might want to wire the state land office about this." Alder nodded grimly and pulled on his coat. Through the sleeting afternoon, he made his way to the telegraph office. The operator's key clicked out the message, asking for verification of the summons details. Sam sat patient in his cell, watching sleet patter in the window. He thought of Catherine alone in their cabin, praying she was warm enough, safe enough. The reply telegram arrived as dusk was settling in. Alder read it by lamplight, his face hardening. "Just as you thought, Reverend. Pike's document is pure fraud. Never filed with the territory at all. Without another word, Alder took his keys and strode to the back room. The lock clicked open. "Go to your wife, Sam." Sam didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his coat and ran out into the storm, boots splashing through slush-filled streets. Martha's store lights glowed ahead like a beacon. Upstairs, Catherine gripped the iron bedstead as another contraction built. Martha's strong hand steadied her while Lena knelt beside the bed, murmuring encouragement. "Breathe deep," Lena instructed, her voice calm and sure. "Rest between. Push only when your body tells you." Catherine nodded, sweat dampening her hair. Despite the room's chill, thunder rolled outside as another pain peaked. Martha wiped Catherine's face with a cool cloth. "You're doing fine, child. Just fine." Boots pounded on the stairs, and Sam burst in, face flushed from running. "Catherine!" She reached for him with trembling fingers. "Sam." He was at her side in 2 strides, taking her hand. "I'm here, love." "I'm here." Lightning flashed, illuminating the small room. Lena checked the baby's position with gentle hands, her face serene. "The little one is moving down well. Soon, but we need patience." Catherine squeezed Sam's hand as another contraction began. He repeated, "I'm here, I'm here," like a prayer while she worked through the pain. Downstairs, Reverend Boone and Sheriff Alder sat by Martha's cook stove, warming their hands around coffee cups. The storm rattled the windows. "Pike won't take this lying down," Alder said quietly. "Man like that, caught in a fraud." Boone nodded. "We'll need proof lined up proper. Those forged documents, the fake summons, all of it." "State office is sending an agent," Alder replied. "Soon as this weather breaks." They fell silent as Catherine's labor sounds drifted down. Both men had seen enough of life to know the dangers of childbirth, especially one coming early. Lena's. "The best midwife in 3 territories," Boone said, as if reading Alder's thoughts. "And Martha's got more sense than most doctors." Alder studied his coffee. "Pike's still out there somewhere. Him and those 2 riders." "Then we'll watch," Boone said simply, "and pray." Above them, Catherine labored on through the storm, holding tight to Sam's hand while Lena and Martha guided her with steady wisdom. Each flash of lightning threw their faces into sharp relief. Catherine's determination, Sam's fierce devotion, Lena's calm strength, Martha's practical kindness. Thunder shook the building as Lena checked the baby again. "Soon," she repeated softly. "Very soon now. But we must have patience." The deep night wrapped around Martha's mercantile like a thick blanket, broken only by flashes of lightning and the steady drum of rain. Upstairs, in the small room warmed by a pot-bellied stove, Catherine's labor reached its peak. Her strength, tested by hours of work, began to waver. "I cannot," she whispered, tears mixing with sweat. "I will fail this child." Lena Nez moved closer, her presence steady as mountain stone. She spoke first in Dine, the words flowing like water over smooth rocks, then translated with quiet authority. "You carry the strength of all mothers before you," she said, one hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Your heart beats with theirs. This child knows your voice, your love. Trust in that strength." Martha dabbed Catherine's forehead with a cool cloth while Sam held her hand, his grip unwavering. Thunder rolled outside as another contraction built. "Now," Lena instructed, her voice clear and firm. "Push with all your heart." Catherine gathered her remaining strength, squeezing Sam's hand. The contraction peaked, stronger than any before. She bore down with everything she had left. Then, piercing the night like dawn itself, came a thin, fierce cry. Lena's hands moved swift and sure, lifting a small, early baby boy. She worked quickly, rubbing him with warmed claws until his skin flushed pink. With practiced care, she laid him against Catherine's chest, skin to skin, covering them both with a soft blanket. Tears flowed freely down Catherine's cheeks as she cradled her son. Sam's hands trembled as he reached out, counting tiny fingers, touching the downy head with reverence. "You're perfect to me," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. Perfect." Lena remained vigilant, tending to Catherine with boiled water and clean muslin, preventing fever with methods passed down through generations of healers. Her movements were precise, each step performed with quiet prayer and purpose. Downstairs, Martha worked at her cook stove, preparing strengthening broth with dried meat and herbs. The rich aroma drifted up the stairs, mixing with the sharp scent of rain. Reverend Boone, who had kept watch through the night, raised his hands in prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for this blessing. Thank you for safe delivery and new life." His words carried the weight of genuine gratitude. As dawn began to rinse the sky in pale gold, the storm finally released its grip. The thunder faded to distant grumbles, and the rain softened to a gentle patter. Sheriff Alder stepped out onto the Mercantile's covered porch, his boots echoing on the wet boards. The telegraph office would be opening soon. He had 2 messages to send, one requesting a state investigator to examine Pike's fraudulent documents, and another advising Pike himself to remain in town pending investigation. Inside the warm room, Catherine dozed, her face peaceful for the first time in many hours. The baby, swaddled securely, nestled at her breast, his tiny fist curled against her skin. Sam sat beside them in the straight-backed chair, his journal open on his knee. He dipped his pen and wrote, "Jonah no more. I am husband and father." The words looked strange on the page, too simple for such a profound change. He drew a line through them, considering, then wrote instead, "Sam Braddock, blessed." The morning sun broke through the clouds, sending rays through the window to paint gold across the bed. Sam leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to Catherine's forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, tired but bright with joy. "We should return home," she murmured, "to our cabin." "When Lena says it's safe," Sam agreed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. 2 days rest first, here where Martha and Lena can watch over you both. Catherine nodded, her hand resting protectively over their sleeping son. The shame that had driven her to Sam's door that snowy morning seemed distant now, transformed by love into something holy and whole. Lena checked them one final time before stepping out to brew more tea. "Rest now," she advised softly. "The hard work is done. Now is time for healing, for becoming family." The morning light grew stronger, warming the room. Outside, the town began to stir, but in this quiet space, Sam and Catherine held their miracle, their love sealed by faith and tested by trial. Stronger now than any storm. The midday sun warmed the early spring air as Sam carefully helped Catherine into the cushioned wagon. Martha had padded the seat with her finest quilts, and Lena had arranged pillows to protect both mother and child from the bumpy mountain road. Little Michael Elias, named in honor of Martha's late husband and the good Reverend, slept peacefully in Catherine's arms, swaddled tight against the mountain breeze. "The bleeding has stopped," Lena said, adjusting the blanket around Catherine's shoulders. "But take the trail slow, Sam Braddock. No rushing." Sam nodded, gathering the reins with careful hands. "We'll be gentle as morning dew," he promised. The wagon creaked as he climbed up beside his family. Sheriff Alder touched the brim of his hat in full well, then mounted his horse and rode ahead. He had business up the mountain road, he'd said, though he hadn't explained what kind. The wagon rolled slowly through town, past the telegraph office where Pike had sent his fraudulent claims, past the Mercantile where Martha stood waving, and onto the mountain trail. Sam kept to the smoothest parts of the road, steering around every rut and stone. As they approached the ridge where the trail narrowed between tall pines, 3 riders appeared, blocking the way. Pike sat his horse in the center, his polished boots now dusty, flanked by Corman and Sloat. Their faces were hard as winter frost. "That's far enough," Pike called out, producing a sheaf of papers. "Sign these quitclaim documents now, Braddock, or we'll take possession pending legal review." Sam pulled the wagon to a gentle stop, mindful of his precious cargo. Before he could speak, movement rustled in the trees to either side. Sheriff Alder emerged on horseback, accompanied by 3 solid townsmen wearing deputy badges. "Those papers." "Avoid Pike," Alder announced, his voice carrying clear in the mountain air. "You know it, and I know it." The tension drew tight as a fiddle string. Corman's hand drifted toward his gun. Sloat's fingers twitched. The deputies' hands moved to their holsters, and the metallic click of hammers being cocked echoed through. The tree's Sam kept his own hand steady on the reins, away from his weapon. "There's a child in this wagon," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "A newborn boy, 2 days old. Think careful on what you're about to do." Reverend Boone stepped out from behind a pine, his Bible in one hand and official papers in the other. "I have here," he said clearly, "a properly witnessed covenant marriage record and certified copies of Sam Braddock's water right to that spring." He held them up so the sunlight caught the official stamps and seals. Sheriff Alder pulled a telegram from his vest pocket. "And I have here a wire from the state capitol. Pike, you're under investigation for land fraud across 3 counties. Your claims are suspended pending review." Pike's face twisted. He yanked his horse's head around, spurring hard for a gap between the trees. One of the deputies raised his rifle and fired, not at Pike's head, but at his hat. The shot knocked. The fine beaver fell clear off, and Pike's horse reared in surprise, throwing him hard to the ground. Corman and Sloat looked at each other, then at the rifles aimed their way. Without a word, they drew their pistols slowly with thumb and forefinger, dropped them in the dirt, and raised their hands. "Wise choice," Alder said, nodding to his deputies. They moved forward to collect the weapons while he produced a set of irons for Pike, who sat in the dust, wearing an expression of pure venom. Sam felt Catherine's hand squeeze his arm. In her lap, Michael stirred but didn't wake, peaceful as dawn despite the tension around him. The deputies led Pike, Corman, and Sloat back toward town, where they would wait for the circuit judge's arrival. Sheriff Alder paused beside the wagon. "Get your family home, Sam," he said softly. "We'll handle things from here." The rest of the journey passed quietly. Sam guided the wagon with extra care over the last stretch of trail. When they reached the cabin, the afternoon light was turning golden, casting long shadows from the aspens dot inside. Everything waited just as they'd left it. Sam had aired the cabin and changed the bedding before bringing them home. The cradle he'd carved during the long winter nights stood ready beside their bed, its aspen wood smooth as silk. Catherine laid Michael in it with tender care, her fingers lingering on his tiny cheek. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for mercy. Instead of blood today, for law instead of violence, for this home and this family." Sam wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched their son sleep in the cradle, safe at last in their mountain sanctuary. The next 2 weeks unfolded like pages in Sam's journal, each day marked by small victories and tender moments. The February snow began its slow retreat, melting back a few inches each noon while holding firm in the shadow places. Sam kept his trap lines close to the cabin, never straying more than an hour's walk away, always within whistle range of home. Martha Valdez appeared every 3rd day, carrying steaming pots of rich bone broth and herb-flecked stew. "For the mother's milk," she would say, pressing the warm containers into Catherine's hands. Her visits brought news from town, shared over cups of coffee, while Michael nursed. Reverend Boone rode through twice, his saddlebags heavy with books. He sat at their table, patient as spring itself, helping Catherine learn verses from Matthew about hope and new beginnings. Sam listened while mending harness, the leather working smooth under his hands as the words settled in his heart. Lena Nez made one more visit, her keen eyes noting every detail of Michael's progress. She weighed him in a cloth sling, nodding with satisfaction at his growing strength. "He feeds well," she told Catherine. "Your body knows what to do." Her approval carried the weight of generations of wisdom. When Sheriff Alder's message arrived that the circuit judge would hear their case on the third Sabbath, Sam felt Catherine's shoulders tense beneath his hand. But her voice stayed steady as she said, "We'll face them with truth." The schoolhouse filled early that Sunday morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts. The judge, travel-worn but sharp-eyed, settled behind the teacher's desk while townsfolk squeezed into student benches. County Clerk Harrell presented his ledgers first, pages marked with careful ribbons. His finger traced the original water right entry, then the certified copies, each date and detail clear as creek water. The judge examined them through his spectacles, nodding slowly. Reverend Boone stepped forward next, laying out a collection of seals and documents. With the precision of his former surveying days, he explained the subtle differences between genuine and forged stamps, pointing out the telltale signs in Pike's false papers. "This ink is too fresh," he noted, "and this seal shows a county border that wasn't drawn until last autumn." Lena Nez spoke with quiet dignity, her testimony translated by the agency interpreter. She confirmed the exact hour of Catherine's first labor pains, coinciding with Sam's confinement in the jail. Her careful accounting of time left no space for doubt. Martha Valdez rose last, her widow's black dress rustling as she described Pike's pattern of threats and harassment. "He would stand outside my store," she said, watching everyone who traded with Sam Braddock, making notes in his little book. The judge listened to it all, his pen scratching occasional notes. When the last word was spoken, he removed his spectacles and polished them deliberately. "The evidence is clear," he announced. "I hereby void all claims made by Mr. Pike against Samuel Braddock's water right and property. Furthermore, Mr. Pike will stand trial when this court reconvenes in spring, along with his associates Corman and Sloat, on charges of fraud and intimidation." He paused, turning a stern eye to Pike. "Until then, they will remain in county custody." The judge then took up his pen once more. "Regarding the covenant marriage of Samuel Braddock and Catherine Braddock, I find it properly witnessed and entered into in good faith. Let it be recorded in the county register with this day's date." His signature flourished across the page. "This court recognizes their union and their child as legitimate under the law." The schoolhouse stayed quiet for a long moment after the gavel fell. Then, slowly, people began to line up near Sam and Catherine. The first apologies came stiffly, weighted with shame, but rang true. "We should have asked," more than one neighbor admitted. "We should have helped." Martha stepped forward through the crowd, pressing a tiny knitted cap into Catherine's hands. The soft blue wool bore careful stitches and a pattern of tiny stars. "For the baby," she said, just as she had that day in her store. But now her words carried pride instead of secrecy. Sam shook Sheriff Alder's weathered hand, gratitude too deep for words passing between them. Then he turned to Reverend Boone, whose quiet wisdom had helped forge their path to justice. "Thank you," Sam said simply, "for everything." The ride home felt lighter than any journey they'd made before. They took it slow and easy, letting their horse pick his way along the melting trail. The winter sun hung low and golden on the ridge, painting long shadows across. The snow and setting every icicle ablaze with light. Early spring settled into the valley like a gentle awakening. The frozen ruts in the wagon track softened under warming sun, turning first to mud, then slowly firming into proper paths. In the barn, new kid goats tested their legs, their high-pitched bleating a dawn chorus that made Michael wave his tiny fists in wonder. Sam and Catherine fell into the rhythm of new parenthood, taking turns rising in the velvet darkness when Michael's hungry cries pierced the night. They moved like dancers, passing the baby between them, learning each other's weary steps in the lamp-lit hours before dawn. Catherine would hum softly while nursing, and Sam's large hands proved surprisingly gentle at swaddling. During daylight hours, Sam's axe rang steady against pine logs as he built the nursery addition. The small room took shape carefully. Each board measured twice and fitted true. Catherine would sit in the doorway with Michael, reading aloud from her mother's old Bible while Sam planed the rough board smooth. The scent of fresh sawdust mixed with spring air, and Michael's eyes followed his father's movements as if memorizing every detail. When the creek ice finally released its grip on the banks, Reverend Boone held the baptism. Townspeople gathered. At the water's edge, their Sunday clothes bright against the new green of willow shoots. Martha Valdez stood near the front, her face wreathed in smiles as she watched Michael, wrapped in the christening gown she had sewn from flour-sack cotton and careful love. Sheriff Alder attended too, his stance relaxed now, badge-catching mourning, light as he nodded to passing families. The tension had drained from his shoulders since Pike's removal, replaced by the easy bearing of a man at peace with his duty. Lena Nez appeared on her pony, just as Reverend Boone began the service. She stayed back near the aspens, but her presence spoke volumes, a bridge between worlds, chosen freely. She watched the ceremony with quiet approval, her traditional respect for sacred moments evident in her stillness. After the baptism, Sam and Catherine planted a row of willow starts along the spring's edge. For shade, Sam explained, but they both knew it was more, a living fence, a promise of permanence. Each slender shoot, a declaration of their right to remain. The letter arrived by stage in the last week of mud season. Martha brought it up from her store herself, unable to contain her satisfaction as Catherine read the news aloud. The State Railroad Commission had dismissed Pike from service, citing grave misconduct and falsification of documents. The circuit court had passed sentence on Corman and Sloat, years of hard labor for their part in the fraud and intimidation. That evening, lamplight spilled honey gold across the nursery's new pine floors. Michael slept in his father's arms, while Sam rocked slowly in the chair he'd built, its runners making soft sounds against the boards. Catherine stood by the window, looking out toward the peaks where the last snow caught starlight. "I thought I was ruined," she whispered, a voice carrying all the weight of remembered fear and shame. Sam's answer came gentle but firm, steady as his love had been since that first morning when she'd stumbled to his door. "No, you're redeemed." They closed the door against the night air and banked the fire for morning. The peace that settled over them felt higher, cleaner than mere safety. It was the peace of belonging, of being known and accepted. They were neighbors, now not outcasts. Their home stood protected by law and mercy, and by the God who had led them through shadow into light. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.